Okay, here we go again. Einstein did do a talk on Boscovich's theory, and I'll go into details about that now. Einstein did not provide much information as to the sources that he was working from, and this is highlighted by Max Born, one of the friends of Einstein. This is Max Born, and he says in reference to Einstein's paper on special relativity from 1905 on the electrodynamics of moving bodies, and it has no references or citations of what Einstein was working from, so it can give the impression that it springs from Einstein's imagination alone through his thought experiments. However, Max Born, friend of Einstein, tells us it gives you the impression of quite a new venture, but that is, of course, as I've tried to explain, not true. I.e., he admits that Einstein was working from an earlier tradition of relativity and physics. Now, this is Einstein with some of his friends. They formed a group called themselves the Olympia Academy, and they started studying such things as physics books. Then I found this in the following talk paper by Einstein. Einstein's talk on ether and relativity in May 1920 is recorded at that address, internet address. What I usually do is complain about translations being inaccurate, but putting that issue aside and just going by this usual translation. First of all, Einstein talks about Newton's theory, and he says, outside of physics, we know nothing of action at a distance. When we try to connect cause and effect in the experience which natural objects afford us, it seems at first as if there were no other mutual actions than those of immediate contact, e.g. the communication of motion by impact, push and pull, heating or inducing combustion by means of flame, etc. So he's talking about bodies that act on each other seem to do so by contact. It is true that even in everyday experience, weight, which is in a sense action at a distance, plays a very important part. But since in daily experience the weight of bodies meets us as something constant, something not linked to any cause, which is variable in time or place, we do not in everyday life speculate as to the cause of gravity, and therefore do not become conscious of its character as action at distance. It was Newton's theory of gravitation that first assigned a cause for gravity by interpreting it as action at a distance proceeding from masses. Newton's theory is probably the greatest stride ever made in the effort towards the causal nexus of natural phenomena, and yet this theory evoked a lively sense of discomfort among Newton's contemporaries, because it seemed to be in conflict with the principle springing from the rest of experience that there can be reciprocal action only through contact and not through immediate action at a distance. So Newton's theory gave us the idea of action at a distance, and that was action arising not from contact. So you then have conflict between a force between bodies which is due to the bodies coming into contact with each other, and other type of force where there is no contact between the bodies. So the problem being highlighted here is action at a distance. And we have contact forces between particles, but also forces that come about through no contact. And so the problem becomes, why is there two different types of forces? Einstein then says it is only with reluctance that man's desire for knowledge endures a dualism of this kind. How was unity to be preserved in his comprehension of the forces of nature? Either by trying to look upon contact forces as being themselves distant forces, which admittedly are observable only at small distance, and this is the road which Newton's followers, who were entirely under the spell of his doctrine, most preferred to take. So what he's talking about here is due to Newton, you have this idea of action at a distance between particles, and if you're following that idea, which is called a doctrine, then you're going to treat all forces as being action at a distance. Now you've got forces that look like contact forces, where you have two bodies looking like they're coming into contact. Say if you throw a ball at a wall, you think the ball hits the wall and then rebounds from the wall, and that would be a contact between the ball and the wall. So you've got a contact force going on there. But if you look in greater and greater detail, by looking at a smaller and smaller scale, what you should see is there's no contact between the ball and the wall, and that then becomes action at a distance, a no contact force. So it's this theory trying to look upon contact forces as being themselves distant forces, i.e. action at a distance. That was Boscovich's theory. Boscovich's theory was there are no contact forces and everything is action at a distance. When it comes to particles, they don't actually come into contact. They might attract each other, but when they get too close together, they repel each other before they come into contact. So Einstein is talking about Boscovich's theory without mentioning it is Boscovich's theory. He's just referring it to Newton's followers. So you have Newton, who brings in the idea of action at a distance as a force, and then his followers decide all forces are action at a distance and there are no contact forces, and the main person behind that was Boscovich. And I'm going through it again here, and the issue between why is there contact force versus contactless force, and that is answered by saying there are no contact forces. It is all contactless forces. All forces are action at a distance. Einstein continues as given the other possibility, or by assuming that the Newtonian action at a distance is only apparently immediate action at a distance, but in truth is conveyed by a medium permeating space, whereby movements or by elastic deformation of this medium. So the possibility that there is only contactless forces and no contact force, and the other possibility is that what looks like contactless forces is really just a contact force, and those are the two possibilities. But as far as I'm concerned, it's the same thing. Action at a distance has to be conveyed by some sort of force field, which Boscovich called a sphere of influence around a particle. So action at a distance leads to the idea of a field of force, and as per the rest of the talk, Einstein is bringing back ether from when he discarded it in 1905. So in 1920, Einstein is bringing back the ether, and he is talking about Boscovich's theory. Einstein continues, thus the endeavour towards a unified view of the nature of forces leads to the hypothesis of an ether. And so basically you got the idea of action at a distance, leading to the idea of a field of force, leading to the idea there's an ether, and that's all Boscovich's theory. And that is giving you a unified view of the nature of forces. And that is Boscovich's theory as well. You have a unified theory under Boscovich, and that was what Einstein was doing in his later life, looking at trying to get the maths for unified theory, i.e. working on Boscovich's theory. So the issue becomes, Einstein gave a talk on Boscovich's theory, but he did not mention Boscovich. And so why was that? Well, Einstein was Jewish and Boscovich was Catholic, and the animosity between Catholics and Jews might be the reason. I.e., if Einstein was able to mention the Catholic scientists, then maybe he would take that option. And so Einstein gave a talk on Boscovich's theory without mentioning Boscovich. And so the reason for the animosity, well, let us not forget the Spanish Inquisition. Also,
their evil ways and to accept and embrace the true church, convert now or forever burn in hell. For now begins the Inquisition. The Inquisition.
Let's begin.
The Inquisition.
Look out, Sam.
We have a mission to convert the Jews. We're gonna teach them
Wrong from right.
We're gonna help them
See the light.
and make an offer that they can't refuse.
That the Jews just can't refuse.
Confess.
Yes.
Don't be boring. Say yes.
Say yes.
Don't be dull.
A fact you're ignoring.
It's better to lose your skull cap than your skull.
Oyoingavalt.
The Inquisition.
What a show.
The Inquisition.
Here we go.
We know you're wishing that we'd go away, but the Inquisition's here and it's here to stay.
Oh boy. The Inquisition. What joy. The Inquisition. Oi, oi.
so that was Mel Brooks mocking the Spanish Inquisition and turning it into a musical, but you could see that in large part it was a persecution of Jews, among others that were deemed heretics. And that's the thing. Thank you.